to today's deep dive. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this explainer. Today, we are unpacking some of the most striking, vividly detailed chapters in the entire biblical text. We're looking at Isaiah chapters 4 through 7. We've got dramatic throne room visions, impending geopolitical wars, and an ancient promise that literally echoes through all of history.
Hello everyone, this is TN Inside. Let's begin by reading today's scripture passage from the book of Isaiah, chapters 4 through 7.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by looking at the vineyard called Israel, then we'll explore Isaiah's vision and calling, followed by King Ahaz facing fear, and finally we'll wrap up with Immanuel and the remnant's hope.
So, jumping right into our first section, the vineyard called Israel.
In chapter 5, Isaiah uses this highly relatable agricultural metaphor to explain God's relationship with the nation of Israel. It's a story of incredible care. We see God doing absolutely everything right. He cleared the stones, he planted the absolute best, choice vines, and naturally he expected good grapes. But the reality? Well, it's entirely broken. Despite all that meticulous care, the vineyard, which represents Israel, produced nothing but wild, bitter, and completely useless grapes. And because of this constant, stubborn disobedience, there's a severe consequence. God essentially says, okay, I'm removing the protective hedge. He stops the pruning, he allows the whole vineyard to become a wasteland totally overrun by briars and thorns. God is declaring that he's going to use foreign armies, specifically Assyria and Babylon, as his instruments of judgment to strip away their false sense of security. To understand just how severe this judgment really is, chapter 4 gives us a tragic glimpse into the physical reality of it all. It describes a desperate, heartbreaking scenario where 7 women are clinging to just one man. Why? Because so many men have been lost as casualties of war. You have to remember, in the ancient world, a broken family line and childlessness carried this deep, crushing cultural shame. It really highlights the profound devastation that happens when you turn away from God's protection.
That brings us to section 2, Isaiah's vision and calling.
Now you might be wondering, usually a prophet's calling is at the very beginning of their book, right? But here, we're already in chapter 6. That's actually deliberate. It's placed after all those intense judgment pronouncements to really emphasize the sheer gravity of the nation's sin. And it's absolutely crucial to understand what Isaiah is experiencing here. This wasn't just a normal dream while he was asleep. A vision, or hwanzong in Korean, is a heavenly revelation experienced in a waking trance-like state. Isaiah was fully conscious, receiving a crystal-clear message directly from the divine. And what an unbelievable message it was. It happens in the year King Uzziah died. Isaiah has this overwhelming throne room encounter. He literally sees the Lord seated on a high and lofty throne, completely surrounded by burning seraphim. And the immediate effect of witnessing this immense, pure holiness, Isaiah instantly realizes his own deep sinfulness. It's actually so similar to that New Testament moment when Peter first met Jesus and immediately fell down confessing he was a sinful man. True holiness always exposes our flaws.
Moving right along to section 3, King Ahaz facing fear.
We shift abruptly from that magnificent heavenly throne room straight down to a very messy, intense, earthly geopolitical crisis in chapter 7. The kings of Aram and Israel have actually formed an alliance to attack King Ahaz of Judah. And the human reaction is just total, utter panic. Ahaz and his people's hearts are described as shaking like forest trees in a heavy wind. And this brilliantly illustrates the contrast between human panic and what God actually demands. Because against all that terror, God gives a firm, unwavering command. Do not fear and do not lose heart. He demands calm trust even when destruction looks absolutely certain.
To really drive this point home, God sends Isaiah to the king with a living, breathing visual prop. He brings his own son. His son's name is Shear-Jashub, which translates literally to a remnant will return. His very presence standing there is a message of hope to King Ahaz. It's physical assurance that Judah is not going to be completely wiped out. And God backs this up with an incredibly precise timeline. He gives a specific 65-year prophecy concerning Ephraim, the northern kingdom of Israel. Exactly 65 years after this prophecy is handed down to Ahaz, Ashurbanipal becomes the king of Assyria. And through his incredibly cruel forced migration and resettlement policies, Ephraim's national and spiritual identity is entirely destroyed. It just goes to show, God's timeline is always exact.
This leads us perfectly into our final section, Immanuel and the remnant's hope.
So, despite God's clear promises of protection, King Ahaz's lack of faith ultimately sets the stage for one of the most famous prophecies in the entire Bible.
Isaiah practically begs Ahaz to ask God for a miraculous sign just to prove that God will protect them, but Ahaz refuses. He hides behind this fake piety, claiming, "Oh, I will not test God." But really, this just reveals a deep, stubborn lack of actual faith. He's already decided he'd rather trust human political alliances over his own creator.
But God, in His grace, decides to give a sign to the house of David anyway, and He introduces this beautifully profound word, Immanuel, which means God is with us. This is the miraculous sign of the virgin birth. And it's amazing because it had a dual fulfillment. It pointed to an immediate deliverance for Judah in their current stressful crisis, but it ultimately stretched across the centuries to point directly to the birth of Jesus Christ.
However, because of Ahaz's unbelief, that judgment we discussed earlier, it's still coming. Isaiah uses these vivid, honestly terrifying insect metaphors to describe the unavoidable foreign invasions. God will call for the flies of Egypt, which represent plagues and severe annoyance, and He'll call the bees of Assyria, representing painful swarming destruction.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it unlocks the ancient cultural context. Isaiah calls Assyria God's razor. In the ancient Near East, forcibly shaving a man's hair and beard wasn't just a physical defeat. It represented the ultimate loss of masculine authority. It was profound, crushing shame. This judgment was specifically designed to deeply humiliate a very proud nation.
And so, we bring the narrative full circle back to the vineyard metaphor from chapter 5. The physical reality of rejecting God's protection is just tragic. That once valuable, meticulously cared-for land is completely reduced to briars and thorns. It becomes a desolate wasteland fit only for Roman cattle and sheep.
But remember, it wouldn't be Isaiah without a persistent thread of hope. Even when the great tree of Israel is cut down in judgment, God leaves something behind, the stump, or the holy seed. This represents the small, obedient remnant. From this tiny, seemingly lifeless stump, God's grand, unstoppable plan of salvation for all of humanity is going to grow. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought for your own daily walk. When the Assyrian armies of life surround you, when crises hit out of nowhere and your heart shakes like a forest tree in the wind, how will you respond? Will you react with panic like King Ahaz? Or will you choose to trust the unshakable promise of Immanuel, that no matter what happens, God is truly with us? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope mapping out these chapters has deeply enriched your understanding of the text. Keep learning, keep trusting, and I'll see you next time.